All right. So I want to talk about the crime situation because this is a great case study of how you have a theory of the case and others don't. But in general, circa 2016 to now, what kind of report card would you give the Democratic Party in understanding having a theory of the case about how to beat Trump?
Well, I mean, it's hard to give them a failing grade. Certainly from 16 to 20, only because of their extraordinary success in winning elections in 17, 18, 19, and 20. So, yep. And in 21 and 22. So they really had a good theory of the case. And while Donald Trump was active on the political stage and a political threat to win again, Democrats actually had a very good theory of the case. And if you just look at the results in 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, they did very well. And partly in 23. The problem for the Democratic Party has come, especially now, going into 24 for 1,000 reasons that we've talked about. But now I find without Donald Trump running again in 2028, the Democrats seem right now to be grasping a bit. And they're, well, not a bit. Their approval rating is lower than it's ever been. You actually have a mayor of Detroit that is running as an independent, a Democrat who's running as an independent in Michigan and doing quite well there. And it seems all the energy from the Democratic Party is coming from the far left. Centrists seem to have very little to say, to have very little vision other than, attacking Donald Trump, which did not work in 2024. I would say it's not working in 2025 if you look at their numbers. And so they have to come up with a new strategy.
Yeah. And the other metric I'd use, you're right about the ballot box 2017 forward till 24, but it's also just Trump's changing of America. He changed America a fair amount in his first term. The Democrats, even as they were winning elections, didn't completely stop him. And obviously the 6 months of this term, he's changing a lot, right? He's changing a lot. So on crime in DC, just again, you've talked about it this week, but just drill down. What are Democrats doing wrong in their approach to his move to take over the policing of DC? What are the errors they're making?
What the Democrats right now need to do is stop quoting crime statistics. It's maddening when people quote crime statistics and Americans don't feel that. And you could look at New York City and I believe 21 and 22. Crime was up, started to subside, I believe, in 22. Going into 23, and everybody was talking about how safe it was. Nobody felt safe. Very few people felt safe in New York City. Those crime numbers were a leading indicator, but you still had quality of life issues. If you had a homeless population all over Manhattan and people that needed to be in shelters for their own protection and for the protection for others, and people that were mentally ill roaming around city streets, people in New York and the subways, people in New York weren't going to feel safe. Now that's changed a good bit now. But I find it just maddening to hear Democrats talking about how safe Washington, D.C. is. And look at the crime stats. Well, okay. I remember Marion Barry saying Washington, D.C. is getting safer and the crime stats are going down if you don't count the murders. Right now, if I'm not mistaken, with the last stat I've seen, Washington, D.C. is still ranked number 3 in large cities with a number of gun homicides. And so even if you don't want to talk about that, even if you want to just go to how people are feeling, all right, let's look at the numbers there. There's a Washington Post poll that was published just a couple of months ago. 91% of Washington, D.C. residents said that crime was a serious problem, with half of D.C. Residents saying it was an extremely serious problem. So that's 9 out of 10 voters telling you crime is a problem. Don't tell them it's not a problem. This is short-sighted. This is not helpful. Also, when you have people talking about this in terms of race, Donald Trump is using crime as, as a means of attacking black people. Dig into that same poll. And what you will find in Washington, D.C. in 2025 is what you found in New York City and across the country in 2020 during the whole defund the police movement. In this Washington Post poll, where 9 out of 10 people in Washington, D.C. say crime is a big problem, the Washington Post explains that the opinion on crime is sharply divided along racial and economic lines. And guess what? Black voters and poor to working class voters are the ones who see crime as a more serious problem.
Right.
White voters and affluent people who live in Washington, D.C. do not see crime as as serious of a problem. So again, the Democratic Party is being tone deaf here. I really think the best thing that they need to do, the best approach on crime is to say, how can we help? Listen, we understand. We're concerned about what you did in Los Angeles. We don't need Marines on the street. We don't need the National Guard on the street. We understand they're on the street right now, but try to make Donald Trump and the Republicans an offer they can't refuse. You want to go beyond 1 month? You can't do it without Congress voting for it unless you're going to declare emergency powers, which of course most likely won't hold up with falling crime rates. But let's figure out, how can we do this together? How can we make streets in Washington, D.C. safer? And I think this may be possible because, Mark, you and I have talked offline about the fact that I've had a lot of Democrats who worked in the Biden administration, Democrats who worked on the Biden campaign, Democrats who work in Congress, members of media. They all share stories after I talk about how the fact that, yes, crime rates may be going down, but for 35 years, there's been a sense of insecurity when it's come to crime in Washington, D.C. They'll all tell me their stories about their friends who have been held up, about carjackings, about robberies, burglaries, et cetera, et cetera. Does this mean that officials in Washington, D.C. are doing nothing about crime? No, doesn't mean that at all. What it means is there is still a sense of insecurity. And instead of Democrats saying, see no evil, hear no evil, do no evil, they need to step in and say, yes, we agree with the 91% of Washington residents. There is a problem. How can we do this together and make him an offer he can't refuse?
So the statistics from that Washington Post poll, and I wish there was more polling, but I'm sure it would all say the same thing, suggest this is not a hill to die on, trying to say Donald Trump is doing a bad thing by trying to make D.C. safer. Right. And the anecdotal, you and I have the same experience. Every relative, friend, and associate we know in Washington, if they've not been a victim themselves, they know plenty of people who have. So what is it about the Democratic Party that makes, I mean, we looked through every statement we could find. What is it about the Democratic Party where they're all singing from a suicidal hymn book, fighting Donald Trump on this and not doing what you say they should?
Again, while saying offline, yeah, that's a problem.
Yeah. So what drives, I mean, are they all sitting in one big meeting saying, let's once again give Donald Trump a political victory? Because they can't be blind to this. They've been in this movie before. What propels it?
There's a sense of paralysis. It happened with the southern border. It happened when I would talk about the southern border on the show or talk to members of the Biden administration. It's like, there's a problem. And for 3 years, they just didn't think it was a problem. And my complaint about the Democratic Party when I was a Republican member of Congress, and now that I'm independent on TV, has always been that they think that if they crack down on illegal immigration, that they're going to be seen as racists, right? And not really even from Hispanics. We've seen how that's broken. But among, I will just say it, I said it to Reverend Al this morning, among white woke activists in the Democratic Party, it's the same thing with crime. If you do anything, if you try to strike any deal with Donald Trump on crime, you're going to be attacked. I'm here to say it's in the Democratic Party's best interest, if they want to win next year, to figure out how to start doing what Bill Clinton would always do with Republicans. And it would drive us crazy, where they'd say, Mr. President, what do you think about the Republicans' plan to do fill in the blank? He goes, I think it's a good idea. And then he'd veto 12 of our bills in a row, still say it's a good idea. And we ended up, compromising on welfare reform, balanced the budget 4 years in a row, did a lot of things together. He still fought us every step of the way, but was always telling the press and always telling the American people that, he agreed with our ideas. Who doesn't agree with balancing the budget? Who doesn't agree with welfare reform? In fact, when he wrote his autobiography, in the foreword, I broke out laughing because he mentioned up front his two great achievements, balancing the budget and welfare reform, things that he fought us every step of the way. Democrats have to figure out how to do that, how to say, of course, when 9 out of 10 people in Washington, D.C. say you have a problem with crime in Washington, D.C., we've got to do something. Now, does that mean we need to put troops on the streets? Does that mean we need to send Marines in? Does that mean we have to do what Donald Trump does often, and that is, play to shock and say, no. But let's sit down. Let's figure out where we can compromise, how we can make the streets of Washington, D.C. safer, and do it. But again, you're right. I talked about the southern border. They didn't get it right on the southern border. When the trans commercial came up, I think I've told you, I talked to everybody in the Democratic establishment, and they were like, they just closed their eyes and said, "Oh, that trans commercial. No, it's not scoring. Nobody's paying any attention to it. It doesn't make any difference at all." And I said, "Well, why do I see it 300 times a week when I'm watching NFL games with my son on YouTube TV, and we have the split screen 4 ways, and it's constantly playing?" They didn't want to talk about it. They thought they would offend their most progressive right-wing or left-wing white base, so they stayed away from it. And if they had actually talked about it, if they had said, "Hey, you know what?" And they didn't have to attack. They didn't have to attack anybody. They could have said, that policy that Donald Trump is attacking Kamala Harris for, that policy actually was put into effect and memorialized by Donald Trump's own Justice Department in 2019 and by his Bureau of Prisons commissioner in 2019. Here are the documents. We have them. And it would have undercut that commercial, so they could have talked about other things. But for some reason, they figured that was the third rail of Democratic politics. They didn't want to touch that, like they don't want to touch crime.
Everybody's wondering, is the continued divide between Donald Trump and the Federal Reserve putting all of us behind the curve again? Can the Fed take the right action at the right time, or are we all going to be looking at a potential economic slowdown? Well, what does this mean for your savings? Here's an idea. Consider diversifying with gold through the Birch Gold Group. For decades, gold has long been viewed as a safe haven in times of economic stagnation, when there's global uncertainty or high inflation. And Birch Gold makes it incredibly easy for you to diversify some of your savings into gold. If you've got an IRA or an old 401k, you can convert that into a tax-sheltered IRA with physical gold, or you can buy some gold to keep it in your safe. First, though, you should get educated about all this. Birch Gold can send you a free info kit about gold. Just text the word NEXT to the number 989898. Again, text the word NEXT to 989898. Consider now diversifying a portion of your savings into gold. That way, even if the Federal Reserve doesn't stay ahead of the curve for the country, you can stay ahead of the curve for yourself.